Hello friends, in this series of computer languages, in previous video we already discussed what is compiler, what is interpreter, what is machine language, how compiler works, what is the use of interpreter and how interpreter is working, and what are the examples of compiler and interpreter. Now in this video we are going to discuss about what is the difference between compiler and interpreter. So let's start. So now, at first point, what is compiler? Let's understand what is the definition of compiler. Now, compiler is translator, or it translates the entire source code into single run. So now, in previous video also we discussed what is compiler. Compiler, it translate or it convert entire source code into single run. That is, the complete program is going to translate in at once only. That is, compiler, it make the translation of high level language to the machine code language. That is, it performs 0-1 form. So but the compiler translate the whole code at once only. Now what is interpreter? Interpreter interpret or it translate entire source code line by line. So difference between compiler and interpreter is what? In compiler translate the whole single source code at once only, but the interpreter takes line by line. That is, interpreter scan line by line. Now the second difference is compiler is faster than interpreter and it consumes less time. Now why compiler is faster? Because compiler scan the whole source code at once only, and at last it compiler generate the error of list or error list, and but the interpreter consumes much more time than the compiler, and it's very slower than the compiler because interpreter scan the code line by line or statement by statement. That's why the interpreter is very slow as compared to the compiler. Now third point is it's more efficient. Now compiler is more efficient because the compiler follow the mechanism like linking and loading of object code. That is, compiler generate the object code. After compilation, it gives the object code. So this object code, the programmer can be referred to the another program, or the same object code can be used by the other programmer also. So it becomes the more efficient. But interpreter is less efficient because the interpreter doesn't generate any object code, or it cannot be generate any object code. It just scan the program or code line by line. That's why it's very less efficient as compared to the compiler. Now the next difference is its CPU utilization is more. Now we know that it's more efficient, and once the code is scanned, it generates the object code. So for that purpose, so to storing the object code, it requires some memory because the compiler follow the mechanism of linking and loading. But the as in case of interpreter, it uses the less CPU utilization because interpreter doesn't generate any object code and it doesn't have any linking and loading procedure. Take a large amount of time to analyze the source code. As we know, the compiler itself compile or translate the whole source code at once only. So it takes the large amount of time because if the source code is large, it takes a more large time for the analyzing the whole source code because compile have to compile or translate the whole source code at once. But the interpreter usually take less amount of time because interpreter can scan the code one by one, that is one statement by statement or line by line, so it usually take a less amount of time. Now the compiler generate object code which further require for linking, and hence it require more memory or CPU utilization. But the interpreter, it doesn't generate any object code, hence it's not required any memory than the compiler. Now compiler scan the entire program and translate it into the whole into the machine code, but the interpreter can translate the program one statement at a time. Now let's understand what are falls under the compiler. Now programming language like C, C++, Java are used the compilers, while under the interpreter the programming languages like JavaScript, Python, Ruby, C Sharp, etc. are used under the interpreter. So these are the difference between the compiler and interpreter. Now in next video we are going to start what are the basics of C programming.